The blow lands with a sound like a car door slamming. 6 feet of neck, swung like a club, connects just below the skull, and the smaller male's front legs buckle. He staggers 3 steps and does not fall. 90 seconds later, he swings back, wider this time, and the crack of skull on skull carries across open ground for 100 yards. Dust rises around 8 legs planted wide for balance. Neither animal makes a sound. This is not a dance. This is 2 males of the tallest land animal on Earth trying to knock each other unconscious. And the winner gets to walk toward a female standing 40 yards away, watching. Everyone assumes the giraffe's neck exists to reach leaves other animals cannot. That assumption is only half the story, and the missing half is stranger than the feeding explanation ever was. By the end of this video, you will understand why a giraffe's neck may have less to do with treetops and more to do with sex. Why the act of mating itself is a logistical problem this animal's body barely solves. And why the giraffe's cardiovascular system is one of the strangest pieces of engineering in the animal kingdom, built for one purpose that has nothing to do with height. Outside the breeding season, giraffes live loosely. Adult males often wander alone or drift between small bachelor groups, covering ranges that can stretch across 10 square miles of savanna. Females form open, shifting herds with their calves, staying near acacia stands where the browsing is good. There is no fixed hierarchy that lasts. Rank is renegotiated constantly, and the tool for that renegotiation is the neck. Young males spar from the time they can stand. Clumsy practice swings that look almost playful, necks tangling and untangling in slow motion, while their mothers browse a few yards away, apparently unconcerned. Researcher Anne Innes Dagg, who became the first Western scientist to travel to Africa specifically to study giraffe behavior in the wild, beginning in the late 1950s, documented that this early sparring is rehearsal, not aggression. It is training for a fight that, in adulthood, can put a rival on the ground for good. And the males who spar most as juveniles tend to be the ones who fight most effectively once real dominance and real access to females is on the line. A male approaching a female for the first time does not simply walk up. He follows her at a distance, sometimes for hours, and periodically he does something that looks almost absurd. He noses at the ground where she has urinated, then curls his upper lip back in a strange grimace that exposes his teeth and gums. This is called the flamen response. It draws air and chemical traces up into an organ on the roof of his mouth that reads hormone levels in her urine with startling precision. He is testing whether she is close to ovulation. A male may repeat this test a dozen times over several hours, tracking a single female across 2 or 3 miles of open country, checking and rechecking her chemistry the way a technician rechecks a gauge. If the reading says no, he eventually gives up and drifts off toward another herd. If it says yes, the real complication begins, because another male, one he thought he had already beaten weeks earlier, is standing 60 yards away and has just caught the same scent on the wind. The second male does not retreat. He turns, swings his head low, and begins the specific rolling gait that signals a challenge is coming. Both animals square up, necks curved back like drawn bows, and then one strikes. The ossicones, the hard knobs on top of a giraffe's skull, are not decoration. They are built for exactly this kind of impact, reinforced with dense bone that thickens with age and use, so an old, battle-scarred male often carries a skull nearly twice the mass of a young one's. A well-placed blow can crack ribs. It can rupture a jaw. Field biologists have documented fights that ended with one animal dead on the ground within minutes, killed by a single strike to the neck or skull. Most contests do not go that far. They end when one male simply refuses another swing, drops his head, and walks away, conceding without a sound. But every giraffe on that savanna, male or female, has watched enough of these fights to know which outcome is possible, and the tension of that possibility hangs over every single approach. The winner does not celebrate. He simply turns and continues walking toward the female as if nothing happened. And she has been watching the entire exchange from a distance, apparently unbothered. Because, in a very real sense, this fight was for her. Winning the right to approach is not winning the encounter. A female giraffe will not stand still for a male she has not accepted. She may bolt the moment he gets close, forcing him into a trot that, given his size, looks almost comic and is anything but. Because giraffes are among the more physically vulnerable animals in Africa during any moment of distraction. A giraffe's kicking legs can kill a lion, but a giraffe with its head down or its balance compromised is a giraffe that cannot see a predator approaching through the grass. And prides of lions are known to specifically target giraffes caught in exactly this kind of preoccupied, exposed posture. So the courtship itself carries risk that has nothing to do with rivalry and everything to do with simple visibility.
Dominant bulls rarely stay with one herd. Biologists tracking marked males in Kruger National Park have followed individual bulls covering wide, looping patrol routes over the course of a week, checking one female group, moving on, then circling back days later to test the chemistry again. It is inefficient work, walking miles between herds on the chance that one female has shifted into estrus since the last pass. But it is also the only strategy that gives an older, dominant male first access before a younger rival stumbles onto the same information. Those younger rivals learn the trick fast. A subordinate male will sometimes trail a dominant bull at a careful distance for days, letting the older animal do the work of locating a receptive female, then closing in the moment a fight leaves the winner exhausted. It rarely works.
A bull who has just won a serious contest is still alert, still enormous, and in no mood for a second fight. But the strategy persists across generations anyway, because occasionally, against an already injured winner, it does. There is a further complication most people never consider. Timing itself is a gamble. Giraffe reproduction is not locked to a strict seasonal calendar the way many African herbivores are. Calving can occur in almost any month, but researchers studying populations in Namibia and South Africa have found that conception rates rise and fall with rainfall, since a female in poor condition during drought is far less likely to cycle into estrus at all. A male can win every fight of the season and still leave without offspring if the rains fail and the females around him simply never come into season. His entire investment of energy, injury risk, and dominance is gambled against weather he has no way to predict. And in a drought year, an entire cohort of dominant males can end a breeding season having fought hard, traveled far, and fathered nothing at all. While the following wet season, when conditions turn, produces a sudden surge of receptive females that the same males, now bearing fresh scars from a season of contests, are left to compete over all over again. If the female stops and allows him near, the pair faces a problem that sounds almost mechanical. How do two animals built like this actually manage to mate at all? An adult male giraffe can stand 18 feet tall. A female is often 4 or 5 feet shorter, and both animals carry most of that height in legs so long that a normal quadrupedal mounting position is nearly impossible to hold.
The male has to rear up onto his hind legs, balancing his entire mass, sometimes close to 3,000 pounds, on two limbs, while positioning himself correctly behind a partner who may shift her weight at any moment. The act itself, once positioning is achieved, lasts only a matter of seconds. There is no lingering. Both animals are acutely aware, on some instinctual level, that this is the single most physically exposed position either of them will occupy all season, and that a predator watching from the tree line has just been handed the easiest opportunity it will get all week. Even a successful mating does not end the male's work. For hours afterward, and sometimes for a day or more, he stays close to the female, positioning his body between her and any other male that drifts near, a behavior researchers call mate guarding. It costs him time he could spend feeding, and it costs him safety, since a male focused on watching rivals is a male not watching the horizon for lions.
He does it anyway, because a single unguarded hour is sometimes all a rival needs, and the guarding period is rarely peaceful. A third male, drawn by the same scent that brought the first two, will often test the boundary anyway, drifting closer in slow, deliberate steps to see whether the exhausted winner still has the will for another fight. Most of these late challenges end without contact, settled by nothing more than a raised head and a held stare, a silent calculation of remaining strength that both animals seem to make in seconds. Occasionally, the calculation is wrong, and a male already worn down from one contest finds himself fighting a second, fresher opponent with less energy than he started the day with. Even success at every stage does not end the complications. If conception occurs, the female now carries a pregnancy that will last around 15 months, one of the longest gestation periods of any land mammal. And for most of that time, she continues to move, browse, and evade predators at full size, carrying a fetus that will be delivered standing up, falling roughly 6 feet to the ground in the first seconds of its life. Calves that survive that fall are up and attempting to walk within an hour, because a newborn giraffe lying still in open grassland is a meal waiting to happen. Fewer than half of all giraffe calves survive their first year, most of them lost to exactly the predators that the entire courtship process was designed at every stage to avoid drawing in. The mother's pregnancy, in other words, is not a rest period. It is 15 months of continuing to solve the exact same predator problem that shaped every part of the courtship that preceded it. For most of the 19th and 20th centuries, naturalists treated the giraffe's neck as a settled question. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, writing decades before Darwin, first proposed that giraffes stretch their necks over generations by reaching for higher leaves and pass that stretch to their offspring, a mechanism later generations of biologists would reject. Charles Darwin offered a different account, arguing that competition for food, specifically the ability to reach foliage other browsers could not, drove the neck's elongation through ordinary natural selection acting on feeding efficiency. It is a tidy explanation, and for over a century, it was the textbook answer, repeated in classrooms with barely a challenge. But it never quite accounted for a strange detail. Male giraffes have necks that are disproportionately thicker and female necks, far beyond what feeding alone would require. And males use those necks as weapons in a way that has nothing to do with eating leaves at all. In 1996, biologists Robert Simmons and Lou Scheepers published research proposing an alternative they called the necks for sex hypothesis. Their argument was that sexual selection through male combat, not competition for food, was the primary force that stretched the giraffe's neck to its extreme length over generations, with feeding advantages arriving as a secondary benefit rather than the original cause. Their evidence rested partly on exactly the kind of sexual dimorphism visible in every necking match. Males invest disproportionate mass in neck and skull structure, structures used almost exclusively in combat rather than browsing. And males and females often feed at different heights and postures entirely, weakening the idea that feeding competition alone explains the anatomy. It remains a genuinely contested question among researchers today, with later studies offering mixed support for both explanations. But it reframed a century of assumption. The most famous silhouette in the animal kingdom may exist, at least in significant part, because of fights like the one that opened this video, not because of the treetops at all. Here is the myth most people carry into any conversation about giraffes: that their extraordinary height is simply about food, a straightforward story of an animal reaching higher than its competitors. That story is comfortable, and it is incomplete.
Field observations have shown giraffes spend much of their actual feeding time browsing at shoulder height rather than at full stretch, which sits awkwardly with a theory built entirely around reaching the highest leaves. The competing, still debated sexual selection hypothesis is a reminder that a trait this dramatic rarely has a single, simple cause, and that reproduction, not just survival, quietly shapes anatomy in ways that took modern science well over a century to even consider. None of this, the fighting, the balancing act of mounting, the 15-month pregnancy, would be physically possible without an internal system built to an almost absurd specification. A giraffe's heart weighs around 25 pounds and generates blood pressure roughly double that of a human, simply to push blood the full vertical distance up that neck to the brain. Without countermeasures, standing upright would send blood pooling into the legs and away from the head every time the animal moved, and the simple act of lowering the head to drink would send a surge of blood downhill into the skull, powerful enough to cause a stroke in almost any other mammal. Giraffes avoid that outcome through a dense network of small blood vessels at the base of the brain, called the rete mirabile, which absorbs and evens out the pressure spike every time the head drops. They also carry unusually thick, tight skin around their lower legs that functions almost like a compression garment, and a dense network of one-way valves in the jugular veins that prevent blood from rushing backward into the skull on the many occasions each day when a giraffe lowers its head to graze near the ground. Remove any one of these adaptations, and the animal collapses.
Physiologist Graham Mitchell, who spent years measuring blood pressure directly in giraffes in the field, documented pressures at the heart roughly double those recorded in similarly sized mammals, confirming just how far the system operates from what ordinary mammalian hearts are built to handle. Every fight, every mounting attempt, every calf's first 6-foot fall to open ground depends on a cardiovascular system operating at the outer edge of what large animal physiology can sustain, refined over millions of years for an animal whose entire reproductive life plays out at a height no predator on the savanna has to manage. By the end of a breeding season, the male who fought hardest and mated most may already be favored to lose his next contest to a younger challenger who has been sparring since he could stand. Dominance among giraffes is never permanent. It resets with every new rival who grows tall enough and heavy enough in the skull to take the title away. The females, meanwhile, carry the actual biological cost forward. 15 months of pregnancy and a newborn's brutal first minute on the ground, regardless of which male ultimately won the right to father it. Out on the savanna tonight, somewhere, a young male giraffe is still sparring with a companion, half in play, half in training, unaware that the shape of his own skull is already being built by a rivalry that started with a swing of the neck, for reasons that may run deeper than anyone assumed for 150 years. The animal that towers over every other browser on the plain, silent, strange, and instantly recognizable on every horizon, may in the end be less a monument to treetops than to combat, chemistry, and the sheer physical difficulty of getting a 15-foot body close enough to another to pass its genes on at all.